The development of vaccines is one of medical science's earliest breakthroughs. The first manufactured vaccine against smallpox was developed by British physician Edward Jenner in 1796. The effect was dramatic. A disease that killed 500 million people in the last century alone was entirely eradicated by 1979.
During the past century, we have increased our lifespan by 30 years. Most of that increase is due to vaccines. Before vaccines, pertussis or whooping cough routinely killed 8,000 people a year, mostly children. Rubella or German measles would cause birth defects in as many as 20,000 children every year. Measles would commonly cause between 500 and 1,000 to die every year. Diphtheria was the most common killer of teenagers, all this before vaccines. But I think you could argue that no vaccine captured, I think, the emotions, certainly of the American public, as much as the polio vaccine did. I think it was just a very, very emotional disease for this country.
For children everywhere, the arrival of summer brings joy and freedom. But in the 1930s and 40s, parents dreaded summer, because this was the start of the polio season.
When we look back upon polio today, you look back upon what was really a summer plague. It came every year. It came like locusts, and newspapers would have almost baseball box scores of the numbers of kids who would come down with it in that week. It would start around late May and go up in June and higher in July and spike in August, and then by Labor Day, the summer plague would be over.
Polio can strike at any age, but it mainly affects children under the age of 5.
It would hit this kid and not this kid, and nobody knew why. It would descend on Denver, but not on San Francisco, and no one knew why. All you knew was that every summer, thousands of very unlucky kids would come down with this insidious disease that usually left them incapacitated and often killed them.
Whenever you have an epidemic disease that seems to come out of nowhere and all sorts of children are getting sick, there's great fear, and kids don't go to the pool, they don't go to school.
Data from the time shows how polio gained a terrifying foothold throughout America. In the 30s, the worst year affected some 9,700 people. In the 40s, the numbers grew, and by 1952, outbreaks hit a record 57,000 victims in 1 year alone.
You looked at these children walking down the street and as if they had gone to war. I mean, it was as if they were veterans of a foreign war, and it was young children. I think it was just a very, very emotional disease for this country.
Very little was known about polio, or as it was also called, infantile paralysis.
It was known by then that it was a virus disease, but there was no way to treat it. And there wasn't really sure how it was transmitted. People weren't sure.
There was a tremendous amount of myth and misinformation that surrounded the disease. People thought that the disease was spread by cats. They thought it was spread by fleas. They thought that it was spread by organ grinders, monkeys. They thought that it was spread by bananas that had been imported from South America. They thought that it could be cured by ox blood or sassafras or wood shavings.
People had all kinds of theories about it. You shouldn't take your kids to a public pool. Nobody should give birthday parties. I mean, it was like a phantom enemy, this illness, and I was scared to death as a young mother.
Polio is spread by sneezing, coughing, and contact with human waste. But nobody knew that back then.
There was no prevention. There was no cure. There was no protection. You could be a good parent, a bad parent, an indifferent parent, and you still had no way of protecting your child against polio.
What doctors did know about the disease was terrifying.
The virus reproduces in the mouth, it reproduces in the intestine, gets into the blood, and invades the nervous system. And what it does is it kills a particular cell in the nervous system called the interior horn cell. And this cell tells the muscles what to do. It's like cutting the wires to a light bulb. The light goes off.
The disease was highly contagious.
Polio would spread silently and then pick out its victim and continue to spread silently, pick out another victim.
The prognosis was uncertain. Sometimes it came and went like the flu, leaving no lasting damage. In many cases, polio caused paralysis. Even though often temporary, paralysis was particularly dangerous when it affected the lungs.
I caught polio when I was 21 months old, back in 1952. Our house was immediately quarantined. Started showing signs of paralysis. And at that time, you got in an iron lung. That was what happened. And I was in an iron lung for approximately 11 days.
The iron lung was an early respirator